I think in this time when people feel vulnerable at their jobs and job security and financially, these are ways in which people can actually come together and build a future for themselves along with other people. It's really evidence of what can happen, what's possible.
It's time to change the world.
There's got to be a better way.
It's time for something better.
You feel like you can't really make a difference, but the fact is that you can.
We're telling the stories of people who are changing the world and how you can help.
We just need more companies that are out there solving these problems.
Businesses, nonprofits, artists, and individuals who have found a problem and then created a solution.
If we want to have real impact, we have to do it together.
You'll come away from every episode with action steps you can take to be part of that solution.
We're never going to feel satisfied and happy if we just stay the same.
We can each change the world every single day.
People can actually come together and build a future for themselves along with other people.
Our daily actions have a massive impact. So what will we do about it? We can remake the world. Because guess what? We can. Hi everyone, I'm Nathan Gardner, and this is We Can Remake the World, a podcast about people who are changing the world and how you can help. Glad you're here with us today. I've been thinking a lot about community lately and how much it's played a role in my life these days more than ever. My partner Peter and I moved to a new city not too long ago, just a few months before the first lockdowns went into place. And we were so fortunate because we found a community in our new city almost right away. From day one, it seemed like we had several neighbors who became friends, and we met and became friends with so many others, just strangers in cafes or on the street, striking up conversation. Living in a new place during a time like this makes you really appreciate the people around you who make you feel supported and at home in a sense. And I'm so glad we made those connections before we all kind of had to hunker down. It's really made a difference in our experience of these last several months. I think community is so important right now. Our communities are everything during difficult times, right? Or during times of change. Our neighbors in a situation like this, at least in our experience, I feel like have become our allies when it comes to keeping up on the latest news and the latest updates and regulations, making sure we all know kind of what's going on and what we need to prepare for. Maybe our neighbors help out with kids if we have them or pets, or by getting extra groceries for us when we need something and don't have time to get out. Our families become even more important to us, I think, as we check in and make sure everyone's keeping it together day to day, making sure everyone's staying healthy both in their mindset and physically. And I think in difficult times, we remember how much our connections to each other mean, which is definitely a silver lining when times are tough. We often build stronger communities in situations like this. I wanted to invite a guest to speak with us on the show who offers an incredible example of the power of community. Our guest today actually represents a community I used to be part of while I was still living in New York City. And the most amazing part is that it's a community-based business, a grocery store that uses cooperation based on community as the core of its business model. Some of us, I think, aren't even aware that community-based businesses exist in any form, or can be successful, for sure, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about our episode today, and I can't wait for you to hear it.
More and more of the wealth of this nation is held in fewer hands. That's documented. What do you have to say about that? Is that a problem that needs to be fixed?
My view is capitalism works. Free enterprise works.
This is the kind of corporate behavior that is destroying the middle class of this country.
What is the message that voters on both sides are sending?
There's a lot of disappointment, fear, even anger among people who believe that the economy's failed them, their government's failed them.
When you've got a government, when you've got an economy that does great for those with money and isn't doing great for everyone else, that is corruption, pure and simple.
The economic system in America today is a system of economic tyranny. After years now of record corporate profits, working families won't get more opportunity or bigger paychecks.
We need to make structural change in our government, in our economy, and in our country.
This is the kind of corporate behavior that together we will end.
If you've paid attention to elections of any kind in the United States over the last 10 years, and especially presidential elections, you've probably heard a lot of talk about corporate greed, wealth inequality, and the richest members of our global society, the 1%, as we've come to call them, the 1% of the world's population who are wealthier than the other 99%. The idea that big business and the systems which support it and continue it are dysfunctional is an idea that I think we're all familiar with at this point. The solution that we hear from many leaders regarding this dysfunctional system is often to regulate big business, change policies, increase taxes, write new laws which force corporations to flat out behave differently. But what if there's another option? What if, in addition to examining how our largest businesses are behaving and working to make systemic change that brings greater equality, we also simply build a new business model alongside everything we already have? Well, guess what? We already did. We already have this new business model. I'm talking about cooperative corporations, or co-ops for short. Cooperative corporations are businesses which are owned by a group of people, typically a community of some kind with common interests or values. And within a co-op, each member is often a co-owner, and they have an equal voice in how the company is built and run, which is very different from more traditional businesses, which are usually based on hierarchy. They're owned and run by investors, shareholders, board members, and executive leadership. The employees who are building the company usually have a much smaller voice in the overall direction of the business. With the cooperative model, a community can shape their co-owned company with their common values and ideas. They call the shots and decide each aspect of the business, from the pricing of their products to discounts for members and co-owners to how employees are paid, the benefits packages, and every other aspect of the business. Some of the most well-known co-ops are food co-ops, which are essentially grocery stores that are owned by the people who shop there or work there. While living in New York City, I was a member of one of the oldest and largest food co-ops in the United States, the Park Slope Food Co-op. The Park Slope Food Co-op has over 17,000 members and has been operating in Brooklyn since 1973 in the Park Slope neighborhood. I really love eating healthy, whole foods, and there's nothing I love more than good, fresh produce because I eat so much of it. But the thing is, that incredible produce and a lot of high-quality food in general can get expensive, especially if it's organic, and it's not always easy to find in large quantities. But that's not the case at the Park Slope Food Co-op. I had a friend who was a member invite me to visit with her because she knew how I liked to eat, and I thought I'd be impressed by the quality of the food based on what she'd told me. But what really blew me away were the prices. I couldn't believe how high the quality of the food was, but also how cheap it was. And the co-op had everything from tropical fruit to local mushrooms and heirloom tomatoes to cleaning products and candles and eco-conscious notebooks made from recycled paper. It was a sustainability freak's dream. I signed up that day. I used to go to the co-op every week for my groceries and spend over an hour on the subway there, over an hour on the subway back, with a suitcase full of groceries. That was the only thing I had that was large enough, that had wheels on it, that could hold the amount of food I would buy. In New York City, that is commitment. 2.5 hours on the subway just to get some groceries. Most New Yorkers would say I'm crazy for doing this, and many of them did and gave me a lot of funny looks when they saw my bags full of leaves on my shoulders and a suitcase full of potatoes and tomatoes and apples and all kinds of other things. But that's how much I believed in and loved this co-op. I was lucky enough to sit down with Ann Herpel, General Coordinator at the Park Slope Food Co-op, to talk more about how the co-op is run, why it's been so successful, how they keep prices so low, and the potential that cooperative businesses of every kind have to transform our communities and our economies for the better. So, Anne, what is a food co-op?
A food co-op, or in our case, a food co-op is a consumer cooperative. So that means it's owned by the people who shop there. And we call them member owners. There are co-ops that are worker co-ops, so that means they're owned by the people that work there, but not shop there. So people sometimes get those two confused because they say, well, members work at your co-op. And we say, yeah, they do, but their primary function, according to the sort of law, is that they're shoppers and they own. So that's what we're a consumer cooperative. And we just happen to sell groceries, right? I think you could be a consumer cooperative. REI is a consumer cooperative, right? You can become a member of REI, and then you have benefits associated with
hiking
that.
And the gear associated.
Right. Yeah. So we're a consumer cooperative, but we're not a worker cooperative.
Would you say that there are certain values that are consistent across all consumer cooperatives? And what sets the Park Slope Food Co-op apart from other co-ops, other food co-ops?
Well, all cooperatives, and I can't speak for the large ones like REI or something, but all cooperatives should be following the cooperative principles, right? And those were formulated decades ago, and they've been updated, and there's an organization in Switzerland called, I think it's called the International Cooperative Alliance, and they sort of are the keepers of these principles, and they also promote cooperatives in a lot of ways globally. And so those things are like democratic member control and cooperation among cooperatives and education to youth and others about cooperation. And you're not how would I put this one? You're not kind of indebted to any other outside organization, right? That you own, you're sort of an autonomous organization. So all cooperatives should have those values at the heart of them. And like the cooperative principles are like in every issue of the Gazette that we have, and they're on our website. And that's kind of a marker. And I think in the food co-op world, I would say that's a big marker, right? That's something that as a group, we all identify with each other through those principles. And then I think it just kind of, in the food co-op world, I think in general, I would think the values are around the well-being of the community, the well-being, of the members in the community, the environment, and trying to be good citizens towards all those things and trying to build a healthy community. I think that's pretty common across all food co-ops, no matter if they make people work or not.
How did the Park Slope Food Co-op begin? What were the problems that the founders were trying to solve, and when did they get started?
Mm-hmm. So it was about a dozen young people, and I say young because most of them were in their 20s, and they used to call the oldest member Grandpa or something because I think he was like 40. And they all lived in this sort of neighborhood right here in Park Slope, kind of central Park Slope, in the early 70s. And it was really a time in which co-ops were kind of blossoming all over. Brooklyn and New York, there was dozens of co-ops. And so they wanted a co-op primarily for having access to the food they wanted to buy. It really wasn't about not having access to food. I know that becomes food access is kind of an issue that sometimes is brought up, or food co-ops about access. And in our case, it wasn't about access. Park Slope looked a lot different back then, and there were butchers and greengrocers and grocery stores. So there's a lot of places to buy food in Park Slope. It's just that this group of people wanted to buy like brown rice and dried beans and unsalted, no sugar peanut butter and things like that, right? So, and they also wanted to have some choice about like the vegetables they sold and things like that. So it was really about that more than anything. Is that they had certain desires as young people, kind of coming out of the social movements of the late 60s. A lot of them were very active in those social movements, be it the anti-war or the women's movement or, as they said back then, the gay liberation movement. Those were important to them. And so they sort of, coming out of that, they sort of had a desire to create a community and have food that reflected their values. And then I think the other thing is that they were very attracted to this idea of working together to make that food affordable to all of them, because it seems like ancient history, but, in the 1970s, in New York, someone could be underemployed, as we would say now, but be able to live in New York, right? But people, it's not like they had a lot of money to throw around, but they were able to get an apartment for $150 a month and live with a bunch of people. And,
Can't imagine that now.
and you can't imagine this, right? No, it's like, it blows your mind. And, but it's not like they had excess money. So making this kind of food, like brown rice, affordable to everyone was important. And so they saw working together, like everyone contributing a bit of their time, as a way to do that, to make it affordable.
So how does the Park Slope Food Coop do that for people? Would you talk a bit about the model here and how the Park Slope Food Coop is able to offer quality food at a lower price than anywhere else?
Right. So if you didn't know we were a co-op, you'd think we were a grocery store, right? Just a grocery store. And so in any retail operation, your biggest cost is always your personnel. So if you want to have an affordable price, you got to think about how to control those personnel costs. And when you think about it, if everyone gives a little bit of time, they can do a lot of the work that you would otherwise have to hire people to do. So that's how the co-op thought about it, right? Well, we'll ask everyone to part with a little bit of their time, which we understand is really precious. And we all have busy lives, and asking anyone for their time is asking a lot. It's probably asking more than even their money in some cases. But adding up all those bits of time, so that's like 2.5 to 2 3/4 hours once every 4 weeks, that labor altogether adds up to running the store, doing about between 75 and 80% of what needs to be done to run the store. So you've actually then, as much as you can, removed paid labor and put it onto member labor. And I think that's always been the way we've thought about the co-op, is how can we design work that someone could come once every 4 weeks and pick up and do that job, right? If it's working in the office, if it's unloading trucks, if it's stocking shelves, if it's running a checkout lane, if it's watching people's children in childcare, can we make those chunks of work that contribute meaningfully to the operations of the co-op, but are able to be done repeatable by people and don't require a lot of staff supervision to do? So that's kind of how we structure it, right? So it started out with just a few dozen people doing that, and then it's just grown over time. So we have 17,000 members, but we only have about 14,000 people that actually work, that do this kind of work. And so that's kind of the basic structure. So it's like when I describe it to people, they say, oh, it's like you have a really big human resources department. I'm like, yeah, that's it.
Nice. Analog to the corporate world.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I came to the food co-op, I was with a friend who was a member, and I eat relatively healthfully. I'm a vegan about 97% of the time, and I walked in and looked around at the prices and my jaw dropped. I just was in awe because I was used to paying premium prices for the food that I ate, and it was an investment for me. It's not like I am, I have endless resources, but it meant enough to me to invest in it. And when I came here, I just was blown away.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we occasionally get criticism from people who say, well, the prices weren't that cheap. But if you go into a more specialty diets, so people who are vegetarians and vegans, people who may be gluten intolerant and things like that, that's where that group of our members really, I think, get some price advantage because other retail outlets are going to charge a premium for those foods. And then I think the other thing is that a lot of our members, you can still shop very inexpensively here. If you make your own food, cook your own food, you shop a lot out of the bulk aisle or the produce aisle, and you minimize sort of your purchases of processed foods and stuff, I think that you probably can't get better prices for the quality and types of food that you can get here.
And even for household cleaning products that are sort of more naturally inclined, the chemical-free or not plant-derived, a couple dollars off over time really adds up.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, an area where, like, the retail market knows they can charge people a premium for that. And we don't. I mean, that's not our business model. So I think that's another area that people can find savings. If that's their values, the co-op does do a good job of providing products that reflect those values.
And you start to see that markup. Once you've visited a place like the Park Slope Food Coop, you then compare to prices in other stores and you realize just how much profit they're making off of these designated premium products. And if it doesn't bother you in some way, it certainly gives you motivation to want to join or start even a co-op like the Park Slope Food Coop, where profit's not the driver.
Right. And that's a big part of it is, I mean, we kind of are the people, not profits kind of thing. And, the price on the shelf is not trying to pay someone, either a CEO a large salary or a shareholder some value, like translate value too. So that makes a difference. But even if the product here seems a little expensive, people also value that they're spending their dollars in the organization they own. So it's not that they say, oh, yippee, I get paid $5 for that at the co-op. It's that, well, the $5 is going to the co-op. It's not going to Target or Costco or something like that, which I don't have any economic interest in. So even though this might be a little on the more expensive side for me, I know my money is staying within the co-op, right? So it's like that's important to people too. And like we did a survey, because it's been like 3 years ago now, and the percentage of people that buy almost between like 90 and 100% of their products in the co-op is extraordinarily high. Like the guy who did the survey with us, he was a co-op member at the time who has run a lot of market surveys his whole career. And he was like, you don't see these numbers anywhere else, any other retail or consumer product or anything, that people have that much loyalty.
Wow.
And I think a lot of it is because people say, I'm okay that it costs a little bit more at the co-op for that particular product because it's my co-op.
Yeah. And all the values that the co-op maintains regarding sustainability, regarding community engagement, some things that I certainly know about. I'd love to hear a bit. You mentioned this a little bit ago, just briefly, but about what the co-op, the Park Slope Food Coop, does to support farmers. I think there's a farming cooperative that was formed to support the Park Slope. I'd love to hear a bit about that.
So, we tried to foster relationships with individual farmers. At some point, though, because of the volume we sell, it becomes almost impossible to do that. We can't have, 50 trucks pulling up here, We know we sell about 1.2 cases of produce a minute.
A minute,
yeah. So that's a lot of food.
Yeah.
So over time, as we grew in our operations group, it became less efficient for us to deal one-on-one with farmers. So we fortunately, at least a dozen years ago, were contacted by some Amish farmers out in Lancaster County who said, hey, we're going to start bringing food into New York City, and we heard about you, and we really want to, see if we can supply you with stuff. So they came, and, there they were in the produce aisle. And at the time, our produce buyer was, really happy because Lancaster, even though it's in 2 states over, it actually is just a few hours drive. So it's very local to us. And Lancaster is a very rich farming community with a long history of farming. So he was really pleased to have another resource. And so he took a gamble, and they took a gamble on us, right? And I think they only came once a week at first. And then as they grew, they realized, okay, we're actually a pretty good customer. We place an order every week. We pay our bills, really important. We pay our bills on time. Actually, we probably pay them in advance of when they want them because we pay them weekly. That they were like, okay, well, we want to sell more. And so there became a mutually beneficial relationship because as we took more, and they were able to expand their operations, they were able to grow their farming community. And what they realized, they're really smart, they realized it makes no sense for farmers to be in the distribution business. So, well, that's perfect. You want to keep a farmer on their land. You don't want them driving trucks. They're not truck drivers. Waste their time. And as they built a distribution center, they were able to increase quality and packing and all this. And they were able to expand their operations into Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh.
Wow.
Starting
with their relationship with the Park Slope Food
Starting with
Co-op.
the relationship with us. And they've grown to it's like over 140 farms now. And actually farms that were no longer in production have been brought back into production. So it's really evidence of what can happen, what's possible. You got to take a gamble. They had to take a gamble on us. They had hurt us by reputation, but they didn't know. We had to take a gamble on them that the quality would be what we want, what our members want.
And I have to say, I've tried several of their products in the co-op.
Lancaster's
and
good.
I eat a lot of produce, and that produce is some of the best
Lancaster's
I've ever
good.
had.
Yeah. So you have to admit, New York City is not the place anyone wants to drive a truck into at all. So to have a farmer or a farm group that wants to do that is pretty remarkable. Green Star up in Ithaca, which is the Finger Lake region is a great growing place, and that is a co-op. You see that, that they do the same thing as we do. They are being a co-op in Ithaca, and they have 3 locations, I think, in Ithaca. They've done the same thing. They have actually helped to sustain and support and expand a farming community in those counties around Ithaca. That's why you need co-ops, because we're going to do that extra work to try to make that possible on both sides of the equation. We're going to be a little more patient. We're going to work to sort of bring them up to our standard. I give them direct feedback, just really direct feedback. Like that case, it was just packed too tight, so it ruins the stuff on the top. I mean, that's a kind of, we get down and dirty with them, so to speak.
And improve each other, I would imagine, which is, and it goes back to that sense of community so it's not only affecting the community of members or shoppers, also just creating this community of a food supply. It's a community based on the supplying of food.
Right.
And in the United States, where so much of our farming practices are being sort of examined and looked at for sustainability to the farmer financially and the ways that farmers can be put at a disadvantage because of the food supply. What an exciting solution to have this reliable source of my produce will be sold here, and it will be regularly sold, and it's of a quality that I feel good about, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I mean, one of the important things that we've always been is really good financial stewards from the very get-go. You have to pay attention to your finances even if you're only selling a few cases of something a week, that's really important. And it's also important because the co-op needs to be an upstanding citizen when it comes to paying their bills. And that's really important to small farmers or vendors or local vendors. You need to pay your bills, and that's their lifeline. So I think the co-op takes pride in being that for them, because that's a steady source of income. We've had vendors who've sold us stuff, and then they don't get happy because they see what our prices are, and they're like, I don't want to sell to the co-op because they undersell, the price is different than in our store, and so they might pull out of here for a while. And then they come back because they're like, whoa, you guys bought a lot of that food, and you paid me on time. And then you realize what the world is like out there for them, because the retail world's brutal. It's a relationship. Everything about a co-op is about relationships. So they're not just someone that brings us zucchini, or it's not just someone that sells us some coconut yogurt or something. These are people we have relationships with, and we want to tell them when something goes wrong, and we hear from our members. And we also want to encourage them to expand their, if you made more of that, we'd buy more of that, And I just think that's different.
Yeah, I think treating farmers with respect is such a no-brainer given how important they are. We're just disconnected from them because of our food system currently. It physically divorces us from any interaction with the farmer, any knowledge of them. And a co-op almost seems like a bit of a bridge. The shoppers might not deal directly with the farmer, but they see Lancaster Farming Cooperative, and they know what that means if they've educated themselves about the relationships that the co-op has.
Right. And I think through the Gazette, the people that write for the Gazette, they try to feature vendors, be they people that make, sauces or grow food or meat or, make us bread or whatever it is. I think they try to do that to give them a profile, to raise their profile in the co-op so people understand who they're getting their food from. And I think that's
becoming more and more important to more consumers. I think we can hear a little one running outside the room. There's also a childcare element at the co-op, right?
Yeah.
Members are able to bring their children here while they're shopping.
Yeah, it was really started for the working co-op member. It came up at a general meeting. A single mother raised the issue that as a single mother with children, the co-op wasn't affordable to her because she had to pay someone to watch her kids when she came to work. And so the co-op said, oh, well, that's not a very good idea because you're exactly who should be a member of the co-op. So a general coordinator at the time, Linda, she thought about it and she said, well, okay, we got to have a childcare room. And it's got to prioritize people who are here to work, right? So that they can bring their kids, they can fulfill their work requirement and not have to pay to do that, because then every bit of savings on the groceries is spent on the babysitter. And people are just like in awe, like, oh, you have a childcare room, And I think in order to embrace the notion that the co-op has to be accessible to people, whatever their family situation is, we would be really negligent if we hadn't provided this, if we had assumed everyone could somehow either had a partner or a spouse or someone else at home to take care of the child or had the financial means to pay for it. So in a way, co-ops have to think through those questions and find a solution, because you can't not be welcoming to people.
And how great that every member of this organization has the opportunity to speak, to make their voice known about something like that, a request like that. There are so few opportunities, I think, for true community engagement in our culture currently, I think, especially in an urban setting, especially in New York, where you're out amongst millions of people every day, but there's not a lot of avenues for quote-unquote meaningful connection. And would you speak a little bit more about the impact that a co-op, something like a co-op, has on a community and that aspect of it?
Well, I always say to people, I think in a way co-ops, it sort of makes you feel part of something larger than yourself. And I think in the case of a food co-op, especially one like Park Slope, where people are required to give some of their time, it does the same thing. It brings you out of yourself. It actually makes you encounter other people in your community that maybe you normally wouldn't come across. And you have a common goal. And I think that's meaningful for people. And I think communities need something like a co-op because you need that energy. You need that group of people, because I think if people are engaged in their co-op, they probably start to become engaged in other aspects of their lives, be that politically, be that through their kids' schools, be that through other volunteer organizations, other concerns they have. Because the co-op makes that community connection meaningful, I think it starts to spill out to other areas of people's lives. And so I actually think co-ops build good citizens. And I think we need some really good citizens now. So I think that's a good thing for us.
That's powerful. Speaking as a member of the Park Slope Food Co-op, what I observe is that I think part of what contributes to that sense of community is a lack of hierarchy, too. Everybody here, like you said, has a common goal, which is to support this organization with certain values. And there's nobody who's above somebody else. Nobody's anybody's boss. Yes, everybody's working, but everybody's an equal. And when you're shopping and you ask somebody for help, you're not asking an employee, you're asking a peer. You're asking somebody else who has a stake in this organization. So it sort of dissolves that any barriers to egalitarian kind of interactions between people and kind of levels the playing field, which I think is a pretty powerful thing, even though it's pretty simple.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important that there doesn't appear to be like a litmus test for being a member of a co-op. And I know that people in our co-op come from all walks of life and all income levels and educational levels and have different personal experiences based on their race or their ethnicity or stuff. But when they come here, if you're like helping, for example, in the produce aisle, you're part of a producer team and your job for 2.5 hours is to help keep the produce aisle stocked and well maintained, then you're doing that alongside someone that could make 5 times as much money as you. But at that moment in time, you both are doing the same thing. And it's really irrelevant what they do for a living. Or even, I even go as far as it's irrelevant who they voted for in our elections, because at that moment in time, you're both co-op members and you're both working for your co-op and you're working to support the members of your co-op who are shopping. And that kind of melts away all the differences in a way between people. And I think that's really important, because I think otherwise we are in silos of either like-minded people or people that look like us or people in the same professions or make the same money. I think in so many ways we can be isolated from people who are different than us. And the co-op doesn't really allow that to happen, because no one's asking you, oh, so what do you do for a living? Okay, well, then you get that job. No, it's not like that. Okay, so you're a CEO of some company. Okay, you get to help load those tomatoes off that truck, or you get to help clean out the bathrooms or
Which
something.
I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
The idea of a power broker cleaning the co-op bathrooms is that's kind of great.
Right.
What does it mean to work for your co-op, for this co-op? What are the values of the Park Slope Food Co-op from your point of view? What are the members here contributing to?
Well, I think they're contributing. I mean, first of all, a cooperative is about working together. It's really about bringing people together. And if people come together and work, the project they work on can be larger than if any one individual is working on that thing. So in a way, it leverages our human capital, if I can use that word, in a way that is for the good. So, and I think members see it as not participating in sort of our dominant capitalistic culture. I mean, obviously, we are still very much a part of it, We buy and sell things. We use banks. I mean, all those kind of things. But because decision-making is made within the co-op and is made across the whole body of the membership, and there's not some other group that we're responsible to called shareholders or something, then I think that that is the value that people get out of it. They realize, I own this thing. I can contribute as much as I want or as little as I want, but I understand what I own, and I understand that if and when I want to enter into the conversation, I know where to do that, and I'm not responsible to anyone else. And the people who are employed here are not responsible to someone else. We're just responsible to each other. And we can decide what the values are, and we can decide what our priorities are. And I think that's really what people get out of it, because there's not very many places you can say you do that with someone else.
Absolutely. I think, too, what's so interesting about the Park Slope Food Co-op is that it's this model of a very successful organization which has grown exponentially over time. Mm-hmm. So it sort of combines this capitalistic mindset with a cooperative mindset. Mm-hmm. And I think this idea of cooperative capitalism has so much potential. We can use some of what's informed our capitalistic culture as far as growth and expansion and forward motion with this idea that cooperation's at the heart of it, and empowering whoever's involved to offer what they have to offer and take what they have to take. And I'm so excited by, I think, what the Park Slope Food Co-op is doing for that reason. I think there are other applications for it as well.
Right. I mean, it's funny, like when mainstream media or outside groups that don't look so favorably on us call us socialist or something, I always say, well, no, not exactly, because we actually are really active in our local economy. We actually are really active in the marketplace. It might not be how you define the marketplace, because we try to buy from local or smaller vendors as much as any large people in the marketplace, but we're actually very active in this thing called capitalism. We're not really socialistic at all, I mean, our ownership structure, I guess, is socialistic, but even then it's not, because according to New York state law, we are just a non-stock issuing cooperative corporation. That's what they call us. So we're not socialist in that sense. Each of us own equally a share, but that's because that's just the ownership model. Doesn't mean we're socialistic. It just means that's the ownership model.
I think people just don't know what to call it yet. So, and I think cooperative capitalist, I think there's something there. I think the Park Slope Food Coop is doing something which there's no real category for it yet. I think you're right. People just don't know how to categorize it. So they go to something like socialist because it feels like it represents it, but doesn't capture it. There's more going on.
Americans are individualistic. So a lot of people will say, well, Park Slope won't work in my community. I don't know why people say that, but that's kind of what they say to us. Oh, but it won't work in blank, and they'll name some place, Madison, Wisconsin, or something. I'll say, why? Oh, well, you got urban density, or you have this, or Park Slope is like a liberal neighborhood, or, they just have their things. And I said, but it's not about that. It's just about people working together. It's not about any political persuasion or that we have a denser neighborhood than other people. People drive to a grocery store in Madison, so why wouldn't they drive to the co-op?
Sure. Then the values seem pretty universal, I think, especially given today's current cultural climate of a desire for sustainability, a desire for affordability, a desire for higher quality of food and more say over what that food is, increasing your options. So something I've been wanting to ask you, Ann, in preparing for this interview is, what are your thoughts on how the cooperative model can be applied outside of food? How could it apply to something like childcare or healthcare? Or do you see any examples of that? Or do you have any insight into how that could work?
I think it's a way forward for people who feel underpaid, are exploited, are not in control of their work. I think cooperatives are the way to go forward, and there are a lot of examples. The worker cooperatives are increasing here in the United States. And because, again, it takes a small amount of capital from each person, it really is accessible to people that have more moderate means, to form a cooperative. But here in New York, we're really lucky because there is not very many blocks from here. It's called the Center for Family Life. It's been down there for years, but inside the Center of Family Life, they started a cooperative developer office, right? And they have helped form several cooperatives amongst primarily Spanish-speaking population. One is a cleaning cooperative. So all these women who were individually cleaning people's houses, right? Ripe for exploitation, ripe for being underpaid. So through the Center for Family Life, they all kind of know each other. And then it was like the cooperative developer down there, a woman started to talk to them about a cooperative and talk to them about how they each have expertise, but bringing that together in an organization that they all own. They can set the terms of their employment. They can ask for more money. They can actually have backup. That's almost like sick days or whatever. If you can't do the job, someone else can step in for you. It's called Si Se Puede, Yes We Can. It's been enormously successful. I think the last article I read about them, they're averaging about $25 an hour now, because they were able to, and they own the business, Then out of that same group, the Center for Family Life, there's been a handyman cooperative, and a dog walking, pet sitting cooperative, and a childcare cooperative. So amongst immigrant communities, vulnerable populations, these are ways in which they can bring together their own human capital and become owners and benefit professionally, financially, socially,
support
in
each
so many
other.
ways. Yeah.
A little bit of structure,
right.
And some cooperation.
I think that people who are interested should look around. Sometimes it starts on college campuses. That's where kids get the idea of cooperation. And now you can go to UMass Amherst, and you can go to St. Mary's College. I think that's up in New Hampshire, Vermont. And they actually have degrees in cooperative economics, So people are beginning to understand this as a viable alternative way of organizing ourselves in our ownership structures and in our working structures. And I think in this time when people feel vulnerable at their jobs and job security and financially, these are ways in which people can actually come together and build a future for themselves along with other people. So there are opportunities out there. There really are.
And sometimes I think it's almost a no-brainer. I look at young single mothers and elderly folks who are retired who want to feel like they're giving back in some way. They have meaningful use of their time. Create a childcare cooperative with elderly folks providing childcare to children of working mothers or working fathers who need a resource and an affordable one.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's like if people really just run with this idea, I think really incredible things can happen.
There are some really cool things. I think too, it's like anyone can do it. Like you could be coders and you could decide to have your ownership structure of your business a cooperative, you can be in a warehouse situation and, you got to find what's the thing you want to do, and then can we organize that thing as a cooperative? And that's, I think, really important for people, that to realize it's a very real alternative. You don't have to have a single owner structure. You don't have to have a board and shareholder structure. You can actually have a cooperative structure. It works anywhere, basically. I mean, maybe teaching or something, it doesn't work. But for any kind of service you would provide, product you would sell, any of that, you could do that. You really could. And I think it's a way, especially because of the historic and structural and institutional problems we have with racism in our workplaces, in our economic structures in the United States. It's a way, certainly, for people to feel empowered and to feel in control. And I think that's really important. And the history of African Americans in cooperatives is huge. Yeah. There is a history there that unfortunately doesn't get talked about enough, but it's huge. And I think that's another place, that there is room for people, if they're taught and they're exposed to it, to see that there are other ways.
What I think is sort of amazing about what you just said is it made me think it's sort of a very American trait to self-determine, but this gives an opportunity for self-determination through cooperation. It's taking back a little bit more of the ownership and therefore the power and being able to set your own course, doing business within your own values, and also creating job security through your community by sustaining the organization, where it exists.
And there's so much out there that you can just Google and find out about governance documents and how to actually form it and how to govern it, like to make the governance structure. And there's so many helpful documents out there to like how to make decisions in groups like this where it's a flat structure and, all that kind of stuff. And I think, so I think there's a lot of resources. So yeah, I see the potential there for people, especially people who are younger, who perhaps find either the corporate world kind of a turnoff, they don't want to do that, or that they just don't see the same opportunities for themselves as perhaps their parents or their grandparents had, and that this is a way to maybe realize those opportunities.
And to start something not feeling like all the work falls on your shoulders. A cooperative model, by nature, when you're starting it, will be spread. The efforts will be spread amongst those who are creating it together. So then you don't feel like it's all on you. And if you fail or succeed, then it's your own failure or success, which I think is, again, probably very attractive to, I would think, a younger generation who is strapped a bit sometimes with resources for student loan debt reasons or other reasons, job market obstacles. But
we've kind of come full circle. I mean, we had, the first wave of cooperatives in the United States is really built around the labor movement of the 20s and 30s. That's where a lot of cooperatives started way back then. And it worked. And then we had the second wave in the late 60s and 70s. And those were people whose grandparents were probably in the first wave. And the second wave really came out of an awareness of, this is not the society we want. We don't want a society with the Vietnam War and with, we want a society that is anti-war and with civil rights and women's rights and gay rights, So then that became a natural sort of cooperative seemed like, well, that's part of this value system. And I think we just had, the 80s and 90s and 2000s that kind of wore us all down again. But I kind of see that again is kind of something's coalescing. And this is an opportunity to have that third or maybe even fourth wave of co-op formation as a way for, like you were saying, like younger people trying to enter their working life, their professional life, their careers. And it seems I don't want to do it the same old way. I don't want to go, but at the same time, I don't want the gig thing. I mean, that gig thing is a joke. Yeah. And this would be a way, these are talented people with a lot to offer, and the ownership would make it financially more secure and stable.
And I think the values that made somebody like Bernie Sanders in the political world attractive to the younger generation in a lot of ways, I think he's speaking to these values of leveling the playing field, cooperation. There's no reason why this group of people should have so much and this group of people should struggle so hard. What are the things that we can transform about our culture, our society, so that people have what they need, and then they're not so focused on survival and more on, growth and contribution, which I think will also improve the economy, improve crime rates, things we can do to sort of lift people out of desperation. It seems like there's so much opportunity with a cooperative model to do that in a lot of
And there's
ways.
synergy, because one of the things that co-ops are supposed to do is cooperate with each other. Co-ops look for other co-ops to do business with. That's what you should be doing, and we do that with Lancaster. We recently started with Brooklyn Rot. They're a composting, but they're a co-op. So it's a group of young people, mostly Black, I think, coming out of, I want to say Bed-Stuy, but I might not be Bed-Stuy, but they are starting a commercial composting company, right? So they needed resources. So, we have a bunch of, broccoli leaves and stuff like that. So we have good compost that people want. And so so that's the kind of relationships, because co-ops do that for each other. They look out for each other. You want to strengthen that cooperative economy. And so the more there are, the better it gets, And that's why I do think our elected officials don't understand the power of it. They really don't. Christine Quinn, she came here when she was head of city council because her environmental advisor, whatever, I don't know what she was called, was a member of the co-op, right? So she finally got Christine Quinn to come one day, and we walked her around and stuff like that. And she just couldn't believe it. She kept asking over and over, how many people do you employ? How much do they get paid? What benefits do you offer? And we keep repeating, and how many people shop here? And we're like, yeah, so city council, why can't you get behind this idea? I mean, we are one of the largest employers in Brooklyn. I mean, it blows your mind, but that's what the potential is. And I just think they're missing the boat. I really do.
Well, with more and more examples and more people willing to demonstrate their own examples, hopefully it's just a question of time and momentum.
Yeah, and I think that's where the hope is. That's where the potential is. That there really is a way to strengthen our communities, to bring jobs that are local, that are well paid, to provide services or resources or goods that people want and need, and have a say in what they are. I can't. It's a win-win. It's about humans doing what humans do, which is working with each other, getting to know each other, setting goals and doing those things. So,
well, I can't imagine a better note to end on. So thank you so much, Ann, for your time. Thank you for speaking with me today and for
it's great.
helping us to better understand, what the Park Slope Food Coop is all about.
Sure. I was really happy to talk to you.
So now, are you starting to understand why I was crazy enough to join this food co-op that was over an hour from my apartment? Here's what I think it was. I think it goes back to our theme from earlier, community. Yes, the prices were lower than anywhere else I could find for that quality of food, but it was more about this aspect. Here's a group of people who have decided to join an organization that runs its business based on values. How often do we get to see something like that? We, as members of the co-op, had a community voice, and we were making choices that were the best possible for each member. Lower prices, wherever possible, childcare services, which were free, rules which support each member that are reasonable based on all of our shared experience, profits that are used just to grow the organization so that we can serve more members, not to generate massive amounts of wealth. It's really an incredible feeling to know that every dollar you spend somewhere is not only valuing you, but also benefiting thousands of other people around you. Could you imagine if we could be confident that every dollar we spent was doing good in the world for our immediate community or our global community? That is the potential involved with cooperative businesses who run their organization based on shared values. Something is obviously working with the Park Slope Food Co-op. This is a very successful organization. They typically bring in over $1 million per week in sales under normal circumstances. Due to current social distancing rules, the co-op is of course currently selling less than it's accustomed to because the number of shoppers at one time are limited. But of course, with time, sales will pick up again. As a former member of the Park Slope Food Co-op, and man, do I miss it, I can tell you that members of the co-op are passionate about their organization. They're loyal. They will help it to bounce back. These members know they have a say in how things are run and how things are done and how rare that is, and they take it seriously. Members feel that their values are reflected in the types of products that are offered and how the organization is run. And you really do build relationships there as part of that community because you're all in it together. A stockbroker is stocking shelves next to a preschool teacher and an actor. Conversations get started, and that's no small thing in New York City, to have a community like that, or probably anywhere. Let's get into our 3 changemakers for today's episode. Our 3 ideas which could change the world based on our conversation with our guest. Changemaker number 1. We have more options than we realize when it comes to how we do business. It's really easy in this world to expect the status quo to continue, to just assume that large corporations are the only way forward because they have so much wealth and a lot of customer loyalty. But I think the only thing standing in the way of more cooperative businesses is simple: lack of awareness. If we're concerned about the lack of wealth equality, environmental sustainability, and human rights protections involved in how most global companies behave, we should absolutely set an intention to change and improve our values and corporate values so that those businesses make positive change. But we do have some pretty powerful alternatives. What if, alongside making change to what is, we also build something new right next to it? Part of the solution here is realizing that there are viable alternatives to a traditional corporate structure, as Ann pointed out. And there are millions of successful examples when it comes to cooperative businesses. Ann and I discussed a few, but the International Cooperative Association, a global think tank and co-op support organization headquartered in Switzerland, reports that there are over 3 million cooperative organizations globally, and that 10% of the employed population of the world are employed by cooperative businesses. 10% of the workforce. Co-ops are not on the fringe. They're just not talked about in the mainstream very often. Let's change that. Let's learn more and talk more about what we learn. Changemaker number 2. We can revitalize and support our communities with co-ops. Ann highlighted for us how cooperatives can operate outside of retail businesses like grocery stores as well, where no products are involved. I loved the example that Ann gave of Si Se Puede, the women-owned cooperative in Brooklyn, which was created so that home cleaning professionals can work together to advocate for better wages, to support each other when a member can't work for one day or even longer sometimes, more consistent working schedules, and more. By working together, members of a community of any kind can create an organization to consolidate their talent and values and take their power back so that they're not standing alone in any of their negotiations. Cooperatives can also exist in insurance, banking such as credit unions, education, healthcare, housing, utilities and services, and way more. I also want to call out Ann's mention of the history of Black-owned and Black-run cooperatives in the United States specifically. It's a rich and fascinating history that I've only just begun to dig into and I wish was talked about more. I certainly intend to learn more. There's a great book called Collective Courage by Jessica Gordon Nemard that I'd recommend checking out if you're curious to learn more about this part of the nation's history. It's a widely untold story about how African Americans in the United States decided to take matters into their own hands when traditional businesses and markets were blatantly discriminating against them. I just think this is such a powerful and inspiring way to strengthen our communities and help people advocate for themselves and each other. Many people accuse organizations like co-ops of being socialist or communist in some way, but isn't this democracy at its best? A group of people creating something together which reflects their common interest or values, and which benefits everyone involved, where everyone has an equal voice, and everyone uses that equal voice to support other voices. What's more democratic than that? And changemaker number 3, we don't have to do anything alone. One of the points that Ann makes that I think is so true is that young entrepreneurs, and I would say probably all entrepreneurs, are often discouraged by the amount of energy and time and resources and the cost it takes to build a company from nothing. But with co-ops, you're never alone. You can pool your resources with other people who believe the way that you do in every way. You can pool your financial resources, you can pool your talent, your experience, your energy, the responsibility, and your knowledge, so that an organization can start with a strong support system from step 1. Nobody's in it by themselves. Nobody's fully responsible to fund the business or operate the business. I would guess that so many businesses fail, new businesses fail, because of the pressure on the founders and the founding team that comes with the territory in a way. But when every member of an organization is a leader as well as a contributor, I think there's so much more potential for a stronger foundation and for more sustainable growth. Especially if that organization puts values first. I think when a company uses values and a mission to fuel their reason for building that organization, it's a whole different way of thinking than if it's just motivated by growth and profit alone. It brings a different energy, and when there's a community involved in building that energy, I think there's huge potential. Wouldn't it be amazing to see more and more examples of this kind of business, built by community with community values? I really think that if enough people had the experience I had of belonging to a co-op like the Park Slope Food Co-op, we'd see thousands, if not millions, more of these around the world. It's all about awareness for this one, I think. If enough alternatives exist around us, the status quo suddenly holds a lot less influence, and I think in this case becomes a lot less attractive, and large organizations will then do their part to catch up on sustainability goals, on fair prices, on treating employees well, without being forced to, because they'll realize that they're becoming obsolete. This kind of change can take a long time or not. It just depends on the momentum and commitment we throw behind what we have available to us, these options that already exist. We don't have to wait for politicians and policies to compel the business world to do better. We can create something else. We've got options at our fingertips right now. If you're interested in learning more about co-ops in general, there are some great online resources. A few organizations I'd send you to are the ICA, or International Cooperative Association in Switzerland, which we mentioned, the NCBA, or National Cooperative Business Association in the US, NASCO, or the North American Students of Cooperation, which focuses on helping young people and students to form co-ops, and COFED, the Cooperative Food Empowerment Directive, which builds food and land co-ops to help generate a cooperative food economy. They focus especially on young people and people of color as leaders in the organizations that they build and support. We'll link to all of these organizations and some other great resources at wecanremaketheworld.com on the Park Slope Food Co-op episode page. Really, what you can do is just learn more. Our challenge for you today involves joining the co-op conversation in some way. Join a co-op if you have one close to you, or watch the film that Ann mentioned, which we'll link to on our website as well. You might be surprised about how common they actually are, no matter where in the world you're based. Or maybe you have an idea for a business and you want to do some research to see if a cooperative model makes sense for you. You can start to reach out to potential collaborators to see if they'd be interested in building with you. As Ann said, there are countless online resources for those of us who are interested in forming a cooperative organization and taking those first steps. And don't forget that co-ops help other co-ops. You can reach out to somebody who's already done what you want to do so that you won't be alone as you take your first steps. If you want to support the Park Slope Food Co-op specifically, and you're a resident of New York City, you can join the co-op. check out their website at foodcoop.com. The process is really simple. You just make an appointment online for an orientation for new members, you show up, and you're in. I also think Ann would agree that supporting other co-ops means supporting the Park Slope Food Co-op. So shop at or join other co-ops in your area. I love this conversation. I think there's so much potential when we talk about building business based on community values and community needs. I just think it's such a new way to think about things that makes so much sense. And I'm really grateful to Ann for teaching us more about this way of doing business and the potential that exists there. If you enjoyed today's episode, check out the other conversations we've had with inspiring and really amazing business leaders and nonprofit leaders, thinkers and teachers and everyday people who are changing the world every day. Share this episode with anyone you think you would be inspired or empowered by it, and check us out at wecanremaketheworld.com for more information, links to other episodes, resources, sustainability tips, and a lot more. Subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts or whatever listening platform you prefer. Give us a rating and a review. Help us to get the word out there about these stories we're telling. And follow us on Facebook, Instagram, at We Can Remake the World, or on Twitter, at WCRTW Podcast. Join our Facebook community and join the conversation that we have with our listeners every time we post a new episode. Talk about the positive change you're making or what's inspiring you today. Let's build a better world now. Not tomorrow, not next year. Yes, things are challenging this year, but we can still make change. Let's focus on the next step in front of us, how we can do better now, not only on our current difficulties. We've got challenges, yes, but we've also got solutions. Let's change this world. Let's make it look more like the one we want to live in. Thanks for listening today, and take care. Until next time.